This morning we're going to be talking about sports and religion and how sometimes we may get those a little confused in our lives, and that sometimes sports can become our religion. And so I want to talk about that this morning. And I want to say up front, too, that I like sports. In fact, I would even say I love sports. I grew up playing sports all my life. I still play sports today. And I've coached sports for my kids, and my daughters are still involved in sports. In fact, I'll be at a soccer field this afternoon. I'll be playing golf tomorrow in our church golf tournament. So I'm not here to say that sports are bad. What I want to do this morning, though, is to raise the question, when does sports become our religion? When does sports become more important to us than God in our lives? And so I want to wrestle with that. Actually, what kind of sparked the idea of this sermon was actually during the playoff season this past fall. And I watched, the Ravens playing in the playoffs. And do you all remember when the Ravens were playing the Broncos? Double overtime game, right, in the playoffs. That this was a critical game in the playoff picture to get them to the Super Bowl. They went in double overtime. At the end of the game, the Ravens kick a field goal to win the game in the second overtime against the Broncos. Anybody remember that? Yeah, you remember that, right? Somebody posted a picture online of a man, kneeling with his hands like this in front of the TV set as the field goal was being kicked. And it was that image in my mind, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And it was that image in my mind that it made me realize that was an act of, the only other time I've seen people kneel in prayer is in church. But though here there was this sporting event, someone was kneeling and praying for that field goal. And so I began to get that image in my mind and say, have we made sports our religion in America? Has sports become more important to us than God as people and as country? So I started to wrestle with that. And so I actually found a lot of similarities. I think a lot of learnings we can actually learn from the Israelites and their creation of this idol, and some of the things that happen with the Israelites. It's very similar to what can happen in each of us. It's about who we are as human beings. Before I get into that, I do want to define worship for us this morning, because we talk about worship or idol worship or worship of God. So what does it mean? What does worship mean? And the simplest way that I can communicate, and I've used in the past, is to change the word worship to worthship. Worthship. What is it that I give worth to? Whenever I give worth to something or I ascribe worth to something in my life, I'm saying this is important to me, or this is very important to me by how I ascribe worth to it. So, and I can evaluate how much worth I give something to in my life by how much time I give it and how much money I give to it. So, because those are two things I say, whenever I spend money or whenever I spend time, I'm saying this is important to me or this is worth something to me. So, for example, in America today, or actually in 2011, the cost of a family of four to go to a football game in 2011, including programs, tickets to the game, parking, hot dogs, drinks, 2 programs, and 2 souvenir hats of their favorite team, an average in America costs $427.42 for a family of 4. Unless you're a New York Jets fan, it costs $630 for a family of 4 in New York to go to the game, a New York Jets game. So that's the highest in the nation, but every other team falls somewhere in between. Now the cost of going to worship at church in America, not Glenmar, but across the board of going to church, which includes free parking, includes a bulletin or a program, coffee, donut holes, souvenir shirts if you go on a mission trip or VBS, right? So you got all this thing. The cost of a family of 4 to go to worship on Sunday morning in America is $106 for a family of 4. That's the cost to go to worship. In fact, in Glenmar, we're a little bit higher than that. We're above the average. The cost here at Glenmar is higher than that, actually, per family. So and that's per week. And so every time we attend worship, that would be the average cost. And so we think about that. Now, my other question is, how much time, not including travel to the game, but how much time do we spend at, for example, a football game or a baseball game? How much time do we spend there at that game? 2 hours, 3 hours, right? 4 hours, depending on overtime, right? How much time do we spend in worship? 1 hour. And as somebody said to me in 8 o'clock service, and don't you go over it either, buddy. So, yeah. So, So we get that 1 hour, right? So, but that's what we allot. So let's think about that. How much time do we invest and how much money do we invest in sports and how much time and money do we invest in our worship of God? And so just to evaluate that and to assess that and reflect upon that in our lives. Again, I'm not here to bash sports. I really like sports and enjoy sports, and I think there are a lot of positives out of it. But we learned from the Israelites that it's really easy to worship other things. Because, when Moses left, Moses went up on the mountain, he was gone for 40 days, and in less than 40 days, the Israelites are saying, hey, this person that's been our spiritual leader, gone. We don't know when this guy is coming back. So what was happening was, Moses was somebody that they could see, talk to, touch. Moses was tangible. And it's so easy for us to worship the things that we can see and touch, the things that are tangible in our lives. And we can see and touch sports. We can see and touch teams. We can buy jerseys and all these things that connect us to that. And it's easier to connect to and worship something that is tangible. And that's what the Israelites were doing. They were saying, we need something tangible. Make for us this golden calf, something we can see, something we can touch, something we can worship. Because we don't know when this guy Moses is coming back. And it seems rather silly to us, doesn't it, to form a golden calf and for people to worship a golden calf. It seems kind of silly to us. It doesn't make much sense to us. Well, I would suggest to you that we do some same things even in religion and in sports. Take, for example, these two shrines. I have pictures of these two shrines. Now, the one on your right is actually in somebody's house. And you can see in there are pictures of Jesus and the saints, and there's a cross in the middle, and there are religious books on the table. And this is basically a personal shrine in someone's home, a religious shrine. And then on the left-hand corner, there's another shrine, isn't there? With all this sports paraphernalia, the coffee table is covered. You can't really see it in this picture, but it's covered with pictures and items of ravens, and there's ravens, players plaqued on the wall. Do you see the similarities between both of those what I would call shrines? So there's a very similar thing going on here. Why? Because we want something tangible. We want something we can see. We want something to draw our attention. So my question is, if you were to walk into the home of the person on the right, what would you say is important to them? God, right, or religion, or whatever it is, right? We don't really know ultimately within a person's heart, but we would assume that. And if we walked into a person on the left, their home, that's a basement, and went into their den, what would we assume is important to them? Ravens, right. And so what's become important? And so what are we ascribing more worth to? And that says something about that. So if we think about that, so it's about worthship and what we ascribe worth to. Now the golden calf also, the idea behind the golden calf, the reason they wanted this golden calf, one was gold, and the other thing was a calf would have been a bull calf or a symbol of power. Now, they wanted to identify with something powerful. They wanted to identify with this bull, which they had learned from other cultures was a symbol of power. And so that's why they created this bull. Now, I think about that, and I think about that in relation to sports, and I think about how that also ties in. I was at, because I'm going to be mentioning 3 football teams today so that nobody gets picked on more than any other team. So we'll move to the Redskins. So I was at a Redskin game last season in the first half of the season. And the Redskins have this new rookie quarterback. His name's RG3. I don't know if you've heard about him, but he's a rookie quarterback. And I was at the game when they played Minnesota, and I was there. And it was towards the end of the game. The Redskins are in the lead, and they're going to probably win the game. And there's this play towards the end of the game where RG3 steps back in the pocket, and there's nobody to pass to, but there's a gap in the defense. And so he runs through the gap in the defense, and he could have just gone out of bounds and gotten a first down and stopped, all that. But he decided to outrun the defense, and he took off up the sideline and scored a insult onto injury touchdown against the Minnesota Vikings and just sealed the deal for the game. And the whole place just erupted. And I think that's really, for me, that's the play that legitimized this rookie quarterback, put RG3 on the map, so to speak. And the whole stadium erupted. And do you know what the whole stadium was chanting at that point after that touchdown was scored? You want to take a guess what they were chanting? RG3, RG3. So this whole act of, worthship is going on. And you know what Pastor Matt was chanting? RG3, RG3, right? So we leave the stadium, and I'm walking out the street, and everybody's going out of the stadium, RG3, we're chanting. And you know what? Here's what happens in my mind. Here's what goes on in my mind and my heart. And as I'm walking around and I'm walking out of the stadium, I think to myself, I got to get an RG3's jersey. Right? Why? Why do I want to do that? Because I want to identify with a winner. I want to identify with power. I want to identify with strength. See what's happening? And so that wanting to identify with that became something important to me. And so that's why I was going to go out and spend all this money to get RG3 jersey. I didn't get it. I'm not saying I won't. I'm just saying that there's that part of us, right? We want the tangible. We want to identify with power. Now, Jesus taught about worship in the New Testament. And he said, my followers, my worshipers are called to worship in spirit and in truth. Spirit and in truth. Are those two things tangible? Can we see them? Can we touch them? Can we put them on a jersey? No. To worship in spirit is about our heart's orientation to God, about our spirit and our directive, or how we direct our souls towards God. It's about the spirit in which we worship. And also truth. Jesus was saying, don't identify with power, identify with truth. Identify with God's truth in worship. Identify with the truth of who Jesus is in your worship. It wasn't about power, it's about truth. And in fact, if we look at Jesus' life, he constantly pulls away from power and points people to the truth about God and calls them to worship in truth. The other thing we learn from the Israelites is it's also easier not only to worship what's tangible, but it's easier to worship something that we create. They created the golden calf. It's always easier to worship something we can create rather than the one who created us. It just becomes easier to do that. Because if it's something that I create, I get to do what I want, right? I get to call the shots. I get to make the rules. I get to say what's important and what's not important. And so it's not about a worship of someone who calls out the best in me or wants to change my life or transform me, but it's about me calling the shots and worshiping the way I want to worship and worshiping who I want to worship and worshiping whatever. That's what they were doing. They were saying, we're going to create our own God. We're going to create this golden image for us. And this image is never going to make any demands of us. And what do we get to do as a result? We get to party, right? Did you hear that part? They build the calf, they have the calf, and then they throw a party. The word was revelry. We're not just talking about, a nice little cocktail party here. We're talking about, we're going to do what we want to do kind of party, and we're going to experiment with whatever we want to experiment kind of party, and that's what's going on here. And so they're doing that. Now, so I want to suggest to you today that Israelites were the first tailgaters. Especially the people on the back end of the calf. They were really more into tailgating than the others. I'm going to let that sink in just for a second. So, and we haven't stopped. Now, so notice the similarity between tailgating and church. I want to show this picture to you. I told you, here's the Steelers fans at the top. They're tailgating at a Steeler. I told you I pick on 3 different football teams. So there's the Steelers at the top. There's a church picnic at the bottom. You see the similarities? See how we've just shifted the church picnic to the parking lot at the stadium? And we're spending all that time there, and so we've done that. And the thing is that we just get to do what we want to do. The danger in worshiping something that we create is that it'll never change or transform our lives. It'll never call out the best in us. It'll never make a difference in our lives because it's about us and it's not about our Creator. And so that won't ever change us. It'll just become an idol to us, and we won't ever experience what is God's best for us and calls out for us. And that's exactly what was going on. See, when Moses was up on the mountain, you know what Moses was doing? He was gathering the 10 Commandments from God. He was also hearing plans and putting together plans for a place of worship for the Israelites. They were actually planning the tabernacle, God and Moses together. And so Moses is coming down with plans for the tabernacle, plans for worship, and these 10 Commandments, a way of living, to give to the people, and he finds them having a party around a golden calf. That God was ready to provide for them this worship. God was ready to meet them, and yet they had already so quickly, within less than 40 days, gone to worship something else. That's what happened, and they wanted to do it on their terms. And so that's what happens. And when we do that, when we worship the tangible, and when we worship something that we've created, what happens is we look for salvation from the wrong person. We look for salvation from the wrong place. You know, there was an idol in the cycling world. His name was Lance Armstrong. He was an idol. He was the best cyclist the world had ever seen, probably one of the best athletes we had ever seen. And I remember watching Tour de France, you know, as a person who likes to cycle, and watching those, and Lance Armstrong had won 7 titles, 7 Tour de France titles, 7 yellow jerseys. And we thought he was unbeatable. He had become an idol in the cycling world. And then we learned that every single one he had cheated. He had cheated the system. He had doped. And every one of those, not one of them was won with honesty and integrity. And why is that? Because what we had done, I can't imagine, this doesn't only happen in the cycling world, it's happening in baseball, it's happening in football, it's happening in sports, is what we're doing is we're ascribing so much worth to these athletes that they feel the pressure to become immortal in human being, beyond their limitations, beyond their human capabilities. We're pushing them as a society to be, because we kept ascribing more and more worth to them in such a way that they feel the pressure to cheat because we've idolized them. Here's the thing about human idols: they let us down. They will never transform our lives. They will never change our hearts. They will every time let us down. These heroes, these idols that we set up in our minds, in our society, they will fail us. There's only one human being that didn't fail us, and his name was Jesus Christ. The one who conquered sin and death, the one who rose from the grave, the one who is the victor over all. And anytime we make these human beings our idols, we're in danger. We're in danger. We're in danger to missing salvation. And how often do we look for salvation for sports to be our salvation? I know when I took my daughter Rachel when she was younger, I was coaching basketball, and she was, you know, in my eyes, she was going to be the greatest women's basketball player the earth had ever seen. And I took her to Maryland women's games, and we would go down to the Comcast Center, and she would watch these women, these great athletes, play basketball. And I remember the first time she came home, and she put a poster of one of the women players up on her closet door, and she posted it up there, and she says, "Dad, I want to go play for the University of Maryland basketball team." I said, "Yeah." Scholarship, right? I was looking for sports to be my salvation. I was looking for sports to solve my financial issues. You see what I'm saying? That's not going to happen. She still loves basketball and play basketball, but she's not going to get a scholarship. In fact, most of our kids won't. Few will, very few, but most won't. But how often do we look at that as our salvation? Or maybe even when I was younger, I looked at sports as a salvation for me to give me strength and power. Or I think of young kids today that are looking for sports as a way out of their economic situations. They're looking to sports as their salvation. But it's always mostly going to prove false. God is our salvation. Now, I still think sports is good for us. Again, I'm not here to bash sports or say you shouldn't play sports or pursue sports. In fact, I'll be at a soccer game this afternoon. The question I think we need to wrestle with is, when do we love sports more than we love God? Now, Jesus taught, and he taught about the 10 Commandments. He took all 10 commandments and he summed them up into the greatest commandment. And the greatest commandment was this. He said this: "And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength." The second is equally important: love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus took all 10 commandments and boiled them down to this great commandment: to love God and love others. But what Jesus said was, love God above all else. Love God more than sports, love God more than your work, love God more than anything else in your life. We're called to love God first and foremost in our lives. And the question for us is, do I love sports more than I love God? Do I love sports more than I love God? That's what we have to wrestle with. Well, we're here today, though, to proclaim as we take communion in this service that God loves us, that you and I are the most important thing to God, and that God loved us so much that he sent Jesus Christ into the world for us. And whether or not we love God, whether or not we love sports more than God, the bottom line is God loves us more, and probably more than we could ever love ourselves. So praise be to God that God loves us even when we don't love God. Amen.